Imagine that on any given Tuesday, you go to bed at your usual time, tuck yourself under the sheets, and close your eyes, waiting for the comforting embrace of rest. Minutes pass, then hours, and sleep simply does not come. The next day, you discover that you are not alone. A silent, global genetic mutation has switched off the sleep trigger in the human brain. There is no physical fatigue in your eyelids. The biological need to sleep has evaporated, and suddenly, the entire civilization finds itself with 8 extra hours of time each day. The initial promise of a hyper-productive society where life can be fully exploited becomes the ultimate dream for governments and corporations. But this utopia would quickly transform into an unprecedented systemic collapse. Sleep is not a simple state of inactivity or an evolutionary waste of time, but a fundamental biological, psychological, and logistical necessity upon which all of human civilization rests. Removing that backbone would trigger a domino effect that would destroy our mental health, our economy, and the planet's equilibrium. To understand the magnitude of the disaster, one must first analyze what would happen inside the brain. During the hours of sleep, the glymphatic system activates to pump cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue, functioning like a garbage truck that clears out metabolic waste and toxic proteins accumulated during the day. Without this nightly maintenance, the brain would become saturated with chemical residues in a matter of weeks. Although the genetic alteration would remove the physical sensation of heaviness, the accumulation of this waste would destroy brain plasticity. Short-term memory would cease to function properly, because the brain would lose its ability to consolidate memories from waking hours. Experiences would pile up chaotically in the mind, causing people to forget what they did just a few hours ago, while obsessively remembering irrelevant details. Attention span, logical reasoning, and complex decision-making would drop to minimal levels, nullifying any attempt to use the extra time for intellectual advancement. Alongside cognitive decline, a psychological crisis of global proportions would occur. Sleep, particularly the REM phase, is the primary mechanism the human mind has to process emotions, diffuse trauma, and reset stress levels. Without this filter, reality would become unbearable. In the absence of a cognitive truce, levels of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline would remain chronically elevated. Society would experience a massive epidemic of extreme anxiety, paranoia, and psychosis. Patience and empathy would completely vanish, as the overloaded brain would interpret any environmental stimulus as a threat. This would unleash widespread hostility in the streets, homes, and workplaces, multiplying violent conflicts over insignificant matters. Furthermore, the perception of time would suffer a depressing distortion. With the natural boundary between day and night erased, existence would transform into a continuous and monotonous present. The notion that we would be twice as economically productive is a fallacy that would collapse in short order. The notion that we would be twice as economically productive is a fallacy that would collapse in short order. Initially, governments and corporations would attempt to restructure the labor world to operate under a 24-hour continuous production scheme, demanding grueling work shifts. However, a saturated body and mind cannot maintain performance. Absenteeism due to mental health crises would skyrocket, and critical errors in key industries such as medicine, aviation, engineering, and transport would cause daily catastrophes. Human creativity, which relies heavily on unconscious incubation processes and free neuronal connections that occur during rest, would become completely extinct. The art, science, and technological innovation industries would stagnate, limited to repeating mechanical and automatic processes due to the collective inability to generate new and complex ideas. On the other hand, Earth's infrastructure would suffer a devastating impact because current civilization is designed under the principle of shared space and resources through biological shifts. Under normal conditions, while half of the world's population sleeps, the other half consumes resources, giving service networks a break and allowing nature and infrastructure to recover. If 8 billion people suddenly remained awake and active simultaneously 24 hours a day, the consumption of electrical energy, drinking water, and digital connectivity would instantly double, causing the immediate collapse of power plants and massive continental blackouts. The wear and tear on roads, public transport, and urban infrastructure would accelerate exponentially as there would be no low traffic hours to perform maintenance. Added to this logistical problem would be an extreme food and environmental crisis. The human body, being awake twice as long, would maintain a much higher daily caloric expenditure. To sustain this constant level of activity, the metabolism would speed up, forcing people to consume between 4 and 6 full meals a day instead of 3. This massive and immediate demand for food would double the pressure on agriculture, livestock, and fishing, collapsing global supply chains within a few months and causing famines due to the inability to produce food at the speed it is consumed. Likewise, the generation of garbage, industrial waste, and atmospheric pollution would double, accelerating environmental degradation and climate change in a way that is unsustainable for the planet. Ultimately, humanity would realize that the capacity to sleep was not a biological weakness to be overcome, but the necessary price to maintain sanity and the survival of the species. Faced with the medical impossibility of recovering biological sleep, societies would be forced to strictly implement artificial periods of disconnection. Governments would have to decree laws of forced inactivity, in which people would be required to remain in dark, silent rooms with their eyes closed and without access to technology, not to sleep, but to consciously simulate rest. This voluntary seclusion would be the only method available to try to halt the saturation of daily stimuli, calm altered nervous systems, and prevent civilization from destroying itself under the weight of its own eternal consciousness.